All right, this is chapter 10 notes number 7. All right, so as with every chapter, we kind of focus it on specific problems, and we're continuing. When we talk about heredity and what we inherit from our parents, we're really focused on ideas like problem number 1. This is a important topic for anyone, regardless of your age. You always wonder why you are the way you are, what led to you to look the way you do, act the way you do, your behavior, your personality, how you make decisions in life, everything that defines you as a person. That's what this chapter is about. It's about really understanding we are our parents in ways. And so problem number 1 continues, and we continue to highlight it. One way that we want to better understand how we inherit what we do from parents is this new law called Law of Independent Assortment. And the Law of Independent Assortment is chromosomes and their genes. And remember, genes control different traits. Different genes are different traits. And how they're in each trait or each gene is independently inherited from one another. Now the example here is you have 2 genes. You have a skin color gene and you have a hair texture gene. Which version or which allele for the skin color and which version or allele for hair texture you get from your parents, from dad or mom, is independent. You could get a dominant version from dad or a recessive version, and you could get a dominant or recessive version of hair texture from dad or mom. So basically, it allows sperm or eggs to contain different mixes of alleles. And that is shown right here in this picture. So if we put it in the presentation mode, you can see the father has big B, little b, and he has big Y, little y. Now, he has 2 versions of B, 2 versions of Y. But which B the sperm gets and which Y the sperm gets is independent. So just because it's big B doesn't mean the big Y will go with it. They're independent of each other. So which Y you get and which B you get are completely separate topics. They're both random. So let's look at how the sperm end up. So looking at this Punnett square table, we get sperm that can receive a big B, a big Y, or in other words, dominant B allele, recessive Y allele. They can get the recessive B allele, or the dominant Y allele, or they can receive this other combination, which both B and Y are recessive alleles, right? So when it says independent assortment, it's saying that whichever Y ends up in each sperm is independent of which B or which B allele is inherited. So each gene and the gene versions are independently inherited. So, and you notice too, don't forget, when we do 2 traits or 2 different genes, which the B and the Y, sperm and eggs both will not receive all versions of each gene that the parent has. So when you make an egg from the parent's genotype here, the eggs only receive half of each parent. And we learned that in meiosis, that's where the independent assortment is happening, and that's where segregation happens. So those 2 ideas, segregation and independent assortment, explain why different genes are independently inherited in each egg or sperm. And it also explains the segregation, where you get the B segregated in each egg, or you get each Y segregated in each gamete. All right, the tasks here are ID the 4 possible genotypes for the parent's gametes. So you got to do dad and mom. If you follow along, there's 2 possibilities for mom's eggs. An egg will contain either recessive B, recessive Y, or it'll contain dominant B, recessive Y. And for dad's sperm, there's 4 possibilities. And remember, you're answering this in your notebook. So in your notebook, you got to come up with the 4 possibilities for the sperm also. And it says sperm could have dominant B, dominant Y, dominant B, recessive Y, or recessive B, dominant Y, or both recessive B, recessive Y. And those are the 4 genotypes possible for the sperm, and these are the 2 possibilities for the eggs. Now, with the eggs, there was only 2 possibilities. for their genotype, but you put 4 eggs in the Punnett square. So what you do is, even though there's only 2 possibilities, you want to give each genotype equal representation. So if there's only 2 possibilities for genotypes, but you have 4 eggs, you give 2 of the eggs one of the genotypes, and you make it even by giving the other 2 eggs the other possible genotype. In other words, you get 2 eggs with little b, little y, and you get 2 eggs with big B, little y. So you make it even, so they get equal representation in the eggs. Because you have 4 different possibilities for gametes, here, you don't have to repeat any, right? Each one is unique. Each genotype for the sperm gamete here are different. All right, lastly, it says infer the genotype for square A and square B. Square A is, you just look, it says genotype, so we put these two alleles here from this egg, we put it in here, and we take these 2 alleles from this sperm and we drop it in, and together it makes little b, little y, or homozygous recessive for both genes. And that's what you would answer for A. Child B, I'd like you to do on your own. But then the next task says, discover the phenotype for A and B. So the phenotype for A, so if it gets recessive B, and recessive Y, what would the phenotype be? Now remember, phenotype is appearance, how they look. So the phenotype for A would be, let's see, if you get 2 little b's, it appears round. And if you receive 2 recessive y's, it appears you're green. So the phenotype for the A individual would be round and green. Now, based on the patterns, you have to decide, well, what would something look if it inherited these ones for B? And remember, B is dominant B, recessive Y here, and then this dominant B and recessive Y down here. So it'd be 2 for B, 2 for Y. Now look at what they received and decide what explains how they would look. All right, so the next slide is trying to bring some more real-life traits to inheritance, right, and heredity. We want to look at humans, and 2 common genes that I think play a big role and affect people's life is how people manage weight, overeating, undereating, staying as thin as you want. And one gene that controls that is a true gene called, and I'm calling it generally the hunger gene. And this is true. This has been found that there are different versions of a gene, and one of the versions makes us feel full quickly when we eat, and another version, or allele, remember different versions of a gene are called alleles. The other version of the allele, is that our body responds slowly to feeling full. So think about that. If your body feels full quickly when you eat, you don't eat as much. If your body goes to feeling full more slowly, you consume more food. So you can imagine, just use that logic to decide, well, which one do you think might lead to gaining more weight? When you feel full fast and eat less, or eat more food over a long period of time. So what we have to decide here, though, and what it's your job to do, is which one of these alleles. Now, there's no wrong answer, but you have to decide what letter do you want to represent the hunger gene. And the example down here, students in the past chose an O, and they chose O for obesity. So the hunger gene affects or plays a role in obesity for people, so they chose O. However, what you decide as which is dominant and recessive, it doesn't matter. We can discuss which one you think is more common. If it's more common, maybe you think it's dominant. Maybe you feel like it's not dominant for being obese, right? It doesn't matter. You just choose one. It's the practice that's important, not that we get it right, as far as which one's truly dominant or recessive. So make one of these alleles dominant and one of these alleles recessive. And then for the same thing for addiction, you want to create a letter symbol for it. And in this example, the students chose A for addiction, which makes sense. A, addiction, right? And students always have to decide which allele to make dominant. And one is people are more likely to behave addictively. And this allele for addiction gene are less likely to become addicted. So there's 2 different versions, one where you're more likely to behave addictively, one where you're less likely to behave addictively. You have to decide which one is dominant, which one's recessive, Again, it doesn't matter. Just one needs to have a capital A, one has to have a recessive A. And then once you've decided for both the hunger gene and the addiction gene, for each of these genes, you have to decide, what would your genotype be? Now, you may be wondering, well, how many alleles do I need to show for my genotype? And the answer is, if you have 2 different genes, and you have 2 alleles for each gene, you're going to have a total of 4 letters, just like here. So we have Wiz Khalifa here, and I'm highlighting his 4 alleles. This is Wiz Khalifa's genotype, and we created this a couple years ago. So this is just past students giving him a genotype. And then we have Selena Gomez's genotype, using O's and A's. What you need to decide is, what would your genotype be? So based on what you think is dominant and recessive, based on what you think what is dominant and recessive for addiction and hunger, give yourself 2 alleles for hunger, give yourself 2 alleles for addiction, based on you, how you are. Do you feel like you get full fast? Do you feel like you get full slowly? Do you feel like you behave addictively? Or do you feel like you're less likely to be addicted to things, right? So give yourself a genotype, just like we've done for Selena Gomez and Wiz Khalifa. All right, the next thing is, and it's not it doesn't say it here, but your job is to set up a Punnett square, just like you see here for Wiz Khalifa and Selena Gomez. And what we want to see is, what's the chances of their children being addicts or overweight or thin and non-addicts? What are the possibilities? So we got to fill it in. Keep in mind, each one of these inside squares needs to have 4 total alleles. So I just want to reemphasize that. You have 2 alleles from the sperm here, and you have 2 alleles from the gamete or egg here. So in the inside of this square, you'd write OOAA. I'll insert that for you. Give me a tiny little text box here. So it'd be OOAA. Now I gotta change the size of the font real quick. And we just place it in there, right? And again, how did that happen? We had a dominant O here go in, dominant O allele from the egg here. Then we have the dominant A allele from the sperm down here, and the dominant A allele here. Now, it's uncertain based on this example if dominant means they are obese or if dominant means they are addicts. We don't know. It depends on how you define it. So if you said that dominant O means getting full quickly, it means that that child is going to be thin because they got the dominant version. But if you thought that a dominant version was getting full slowly, you'd say that that child is obese. So what the phenotypes are for each kid, what it means about them and how they look, depends on how you decided which is dominant and recessive for addiction and which is dominant and recessive for hunger. This question here not only asks you what you think your genotype is, but how many times, so when you fill out a Punnett square in your notebook, how many times did you see your genotype that you create for yourself within the outcomes for the babies or the offspring here? So fill in each square. I'll do the first row for you just to help you with the pattern a little better, okay? So we get O, O, A, A. We get O, O, A, A. We get O. We get little O. Well, we get one big O, little O, big A. All right. And that happened because this sperm went into this square and this egg. So this egg goes all the way across the row. So whatever genotype this egg has, this gamete has, you put it in there for each one. But which sperm decides is just which one lines up. So this sperm goes to this one. This sperm would also add its genes or alleles here. This sperm puts its alleles there, and this sperm puts its alleles here too. And then for this row, this egg is going to fill all these up across. So each one of these squares in this row are going to receive the dominant O allele and the recessive A allele across. And then the sperm that lines up with that row will drop down and provide its alleles too. You just repeat the pattern. And then finally, explain how a DNA test for you and your partner can influence whether or not you have kids. So what that means is, if you could find out what the likelihood of your child being overweight, skinny, an addict, or non-addict, if you knew what your chances are with your partner, what your offspring would have, would that decide if you were going to have kids with them or not.